Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Sick, Scared, and Stupid. I'm your host, Jake Thomas, and boy, do we have a special guest today. He is an American medical doctor and a neurosurgical resident who, over a span of 20 plus years, has researched the optimal nutrition for human performance and health. Yeah. He's the host of the Plant Free MD podcast, and he is not the author of Why We Are Carnivores and How Plants Try to Poison You. We'll get into that in a minute. But he's also a former professional rugby player in both the United States and England, and one of the most globally recognized advocates for the carnivore diet, with over 500,000 followers and subscribers across all channels. Coming to you live from tomorrow morning via Perth, Australia, ladies and gents, Dr. Anthony Chaffee.
Thanks, man. That's very flattering.
Get you fired up this morning, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I kind of came right out the bag with it. You are not. Kind of doing a little Maury Povich there. You are not. What's up with that?
Yeah, well, it was a bit funny, but apparently there's a just frankly a plagiarist that's out on Amazon who is taking transcripts from my work, from other people's work, such as, and I've seen a lot of people in the sort of carnivore health space, such as Dr. Ken Berry, Dr. Sean Baker, Dr. Paul Mason, Professor Thomas Seyfried, and I'm sure others, and they've taken transcripts from our discussions and talks and lectures, and then just put them together in a book, and then put our picture on the book, and then put our name at the top of the book. It doesn't say written by, but it does say our name in big bold letters: Dr. Anthony Chaffee, Dr. Ken Berry, Dr. Sean Baker, and Paul Saladino as well, Dr. Paul Saladino. And so it has all of those things on there, and then just, obviously makes it look like it is written by us. And then, but in there it says, oh, this is not written by them. This is just transcripts, taken without their permission and all that sort of stuff. And so, I saw this a while ago, sort of a year or two, well, probably a couple of years ago now. And it's, it was sort of selling a bit, and I was trying to talk to Amazon, saying, hey, look, this is sort of taking my work and he's doing it for other things too. And at first they seemed interested. Oh yeah, no, we'll look into that. And then I just didn't hear anything back from them. So I've been trying to get lawyers involved to sort of write some cease and desist letters. And then it's actually gaining traction. It's actually getting more popularity. And then other people like yourself and others have started talking about it, saying, "Oh, hey, you guys should check this book out." And it's just like, it's not my book. And now it's like gaining more popularity because more people are talking about it. And it's it's a bit funny that way, but it's also a bit annoying because they're just transcripts. You just took my transcripts and just put them up there. They're not in book form, and so. You see some of the comments on the reviews. It's just like, I would have expected so much more polished, but it's not really even worded all that well. It's sort of weird, and because it's not a book, and I didn't write it, and it's just a transcript taken from a video or a couple of videos. So unfortunately, I mean, it is my information. And so it's nice to get that information out there, but it's a bit unfortunate how that's happening and making, because I actually am in the middle of writing a book, a proper book with proper grammar and syntax. And it's, and then I come out with it and I'm like, oh, I got the other one. It's sort of written by a 2-year-old. So maybe I'll skip this one. So hopefully we can get that sorted out. But yeah.
The freaking Seattle, Amazon, you can't look out for a long time based resident like this guy, went to school up there, played rugby up there, was a standing member of the community, contributed. Can't look out for his best interest. Come on, guys. That's fucked up.
I've been a prime member for a decade. The hell.
But you are writing your own now.
Yes. So other people have written carnivore books on all that sort of stuff. So, it was just, I could have done the same thing. I could have just given my version of it and my arguments for it. And, maybe there's a place for that. Maybe that's something I will do. And, but what I wanted to do was do something a bit different, which was argue a very central point that I think is really important, which is the the so-called chronic diseases that we're treating now as a mainstay of modern medicine are not diseases per se,
Mm.
but what I think is toxicities and malnutrition, toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet and a lack of species specific nutrition, namely too many plants and other sorts of foodstuffs that we didn't evolve on, we're not biologically adapted for, and can cause harm, and not enough actual proper nutrition for our biological design, which is high fat meat. And when you look at medicine from that standpoint, you look at the fact that over 90% of the illnesses that we treat now as doctors, that 90% of the deaths in America and the Western countries are from these so-called non-communicable chronic diseases. You can't pass them on. They just form somehow. So, okay, is it genetic? Well, no, because they're going up in prevalence decade after decade after decade in a very, very fast acceleration. And so, no, it's something environmental. So you have to figure out what's going on in the environment, what changed in our environment, and what is affecting us negatively in our environment. Just like, in ancient Rome, they had lead pipes. They didn't realize they were getting poisoning from that. And they went on generations not realizing what was making them sick. And then they figured it out. In Japan, they had a similar case in the 1950s and 60s where they had people getting sick, people dying. They hadn't seen it before. And they thought, okay, well, what's going on? They investigated for 10 years. And then the lead investigator said, hey, I found this little microbe in there. We think this is this sort of infection. Let's try to cure this infection. Spent another decade trying to cure that infection. And then someone figured out that it was actually mercury poisoning in the water because of the factories that were getting in there and getting into the food supply. And it was just like, okay, so there are so many more examples of this, throughout history where we thought pellagra, that's a perfect one. So those two are from exposures, right? So we're being exposed to something harmful to us, just like we're eating things that are bad for us. We're getting exposure. But what about the lack of nutrition? Well, there's a perfect example of that with pellagra, which is a niacin deficiency. And we actually thought this was a disease. And so people started getting this weird disease. Their skin was falling off. They couldn't go in the sun. They were getting sick. They were dying. And they couldn't figure out what was going on. But then eventually, after many, many, many people died, I don't even know how many people died, hundreds of thousands, if not more, one guy figured out and actually proved, because everyone thought there was an infection, and they got this guy who was a microbiologist, infectious disease guy, to investigate this. And he said, look, I don't think it's an infection. I think it has something to do with our food supply, and in fact, corn, because they got corn from Mesoamerica and they started using it. But in Mesoamerica, the people there, they treated the corn in a special way called nixtamalization. They'd soak it in lye. They do other things to it. And that's where the word tamales come from, is nixtamalization. And so they took the corn, but they didn't take the technique. And so we have all these techniques like fermentation and other ways, the nixtamalization and other sorts of things, to lower the toxic load of the plants that we're eating and break down different chemical bonds with nutrients to make them more bioavailable. So, well, there's all these nutrients in plants, and that's true. But they aren't necessarily bioavailable to us because they're bound at one of the ways plants defend themselves, because they're just sitting ducks, right? They have to defend themselves in other ways besides physical kinetic ways. And they lock up their nutrients in ways that we can't access, or other animals can't access. But fermenting can break these bonds, and nixtamalization can break these bonds. And so we took the corn, we didn't take the nixtamalization, and it was a very successful crop. It was very easy to grow, and you could do it all over the place, and people ate a lot of it. And then, especially the poor people, particularly ate a lot of it and didn't have access to many more varieties of food, and they were the ones getting sick. And it turns out it was a niacin deficiency, and it was from people eating a lot of corn and couldn't afford to eat other things. And they were giving this stuff to people in prison populations because it was cheap to feed them, and they were all sort of getting this. And so he proved that. And the irony of that is that corn actually has a lot of niacin, but it's just not bioavailable. And with that process of nixtamalization, that opens it up. So there's all these examples of people getting sick throughout history, sometimes for centuries, and having no idea what's causing it, and then eventually figuring it out. And we look back and, oh, yes, well, lead poisoning. Well, that's because other people spent 200 years suffering and dying before they figured it out, and they passed that on to you. Aren't you lucky? So now we're in our lead pipes for our for our society. And I think that comes from eating these plants we are absolutely not biologically designed to eat, and not eating enough meat. We're vilifying meat. We're vilifying fat. We vilify cholesterol, even though our body's almost entirely made of cholesterol. I learned that in 8th grade. Saw a picture of a cell membrane and has a lipid bilayer, and those molecules in those lipid bilayer is cholesterol. And I thought to myself, like, how can cholesterol be bad for you? We were literally made out of cholesterol. Every cell in your body is made out of cholesterol. Your brain is largely made out of cholesterol. The myelination around your nerve cell, your nerve axons, are largely made out of cholesterol and saturated fat, and that helps propagate those signals. Without proper myelination, you don't get a proper signal. You can get a lot of pain and neuropathies and neurological dysfunction. And also every hormone, all your hormones are made out of cholesterol as a base as well. Even vitamin D, which is a hormone, and testosterone, estrogen, progestogens, mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, all the rest of them, they're all made out of cholesterol. Bile is made out of cholesterol. So the idea that these things are bad for you is something that we've been eating for millions of years, and we have. All the best evidence shows that humans have been eating meat for millions of years, high fat meat, because they say, well, animals in the wild, they're very lean, not mammoths. And that's what we've been eating for millions of years, up until the megafauna died out, 15,000 years ago or so. Giant sloths and cave bears, these big animals, the bigger animals have more fat. And especially during an ice age, you have to have more fat. I mean, look at polar bears, look at seals, look at whales, walruses, the things that the Inuit, to this day are still eating up in the Arctic Circle if they're living more traditionally. So, and just like we see this everywhere else in the animal kingdom, where domesticated pets, dogs and cats, they're getting more and more unwell. They're getting higher and higher rates of so-called human diseases, which we call non-communicable chronic diseases, which we used to call Western diseases, because in the 1800s and before, when you still had distinct populations that still lived in a hunter-gatherer, mostly hunter lifestyle, like the Plains Indians, the Inuit, the Native Australians, they weren't getting any of these diseases. Yeah, they weren't getting any of these diseases, and now they are. And the anthropologists will talk about this: diseases of civilization, the developing a disease of civilization. So when you go through different stages of civilization, you go through this past, it's infectious disease, it's injury, and then it changes. And when you go into basically more civilized society, it becomes the cancers, the heart disease, the diabetes, and things like that. It's like, but it's the same people, it's the same genetic population, and they actually lived to be a great age. Oh, well, people died in their 30s. That's not true. That's average life expectancy from birth. And life is harsh, and people get killed by things, and infant mortality rates are high, especially when you're out in the middle of the wilderness and you don't have access to a hospital or doctors, one of the things that saved women's life in childbirth the most was putting a bag that measured how much blood they lost under them while they delivered a baby, and that actually saved countless lives. And because you see, look, this woman's losing a lot of blood, we need to give her a transfusion. That saved massive amounts of people's lives, and so they don't have that, and so that's what damages them, or damages their average life expectancy. But people are absolutely living into their 80s and 90s and beyond. In fact, they self-reported living to be 110, 120, 130, totally. And that seems like they were just making that up. But it's in Australia, it's in the Americas, it's in northern Canada, it's in Africa, and all these different places on very distinct populations that haven't been in contact with each other for tens of thousands of years. And they all say the exact same thing. Even going back to Herodotus, the first ancient Greek historian, they were talking about the Ethiopians who only ate meat, and they were saying they would live 120 years, whereas the Persians would eat bread and wheat, and they would only live 70 years. And so that was 2,500 years ago or so. And so they're all distinct. They're all on different continents and dispersed chronologically as well as around the world. And they're all saying exactly the same amount of time, 110, 120 years or more. And now we know genetically that humans are actually designed to live 120 years on average, based on the length of our telomeres, which are little molecules that come off our chain of molecules that come off of our chromosomes. So I think that all of these things boil down to, and then when I started looking at these things in that way as a doctor, things just started slotting into place. Dogs and cats, they get sick. They get the same diseases that we get, which we used to call Western diseases. Now we call them non-communicable chronic diseases. And now in the dog and cat population, we call them human diseases. And they have signs in the zoo say, don't feed the animals because it makes them very sick to eat anything that they're not designed to eat. They don't eat the wild. And what do they get? They get human diseases. They get diabetes, heart disease, cancer, autoimmunity, arthritis, osteoporosis. Animals don't get osteoporosis. They don't just get that. Elephants are just walking across the Serengeti, you just crack a hip and fall over, and then, well, that's it for grandma. No, they don't do that. They don't even do that in the zoo where they can eventually die of old age. They just go around as healthy, active adults until one day they just sort of slow down, go to sleep, and don't wake up. We spend decades getting more and more sick and infirm, and then finally just our body just gives up, or our heart stops tragically in a myocardial infarction or a cardiac arrest, or a stroke or something horrible like that. That's very abnormal and distinct in our population, but specifically our developed population, because those illnesses and those causes of death really don't happen in societies and civilizations that are still living to be in a more traditional manner. And so I look at this in my patient population, and I see these diseases that didn't really exist, that people in the 1800s recognized were from eating less meat and more plants, like Dr. J.H. Salisbury, for whom the Salisbury steak is named after. And he found that people, this is long before processed food and excess refined sugar was even invented. And he found that people just eating more plants were getting diseases other people simply weren't. They were getting these so-called Western diseases. And he said he found he could cure them by putting them on a pure red meat and water diet, just like we would have been eating for millions of years. And he did. And he wrote a book about it, the relation of alimentation and disease, the relationship between what you eat and the diseases you get. I mean, it's the same argument I'm making, and except in more sort of modern terms. And so, reversing rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, gout, even helping people with tuberculosis, which we only start seeing in the fossil record post-agriculture. We start seeing signs of the tubercular diseases and infections in the spinal column, in post-agrarian skeletons, human remains. And so he was finding that this massively improved people's immune system, and it actually helped them fight off these nasty infections like tuberculosis, which is a major killer around the world, and certainly was in America and Europe during the 1800s and early 1900s. So it's the same thing. So I'm seeing this in my patient population now, and I'm able to put people and say, okay, look, you have Crohn's. You will not have Crohn's if you don't eat plants. If you just eat red meat and only drink water, you will not have Crohn's anymore. Your antibodies will just go down to nothing. Hashimoto's, I have over 100 patients with Hashimoto's. Every single one that goes on a carnivore diet, I measure their antibodies. They just go right down to nothing. It takes a while, especially how Hashimoto's is a bit stubborn, but it does. It just comes down. And it goes, especially if they're concentrating on sleeping and getting their stress under control as well. And so I'm just seeing them. I'm seeing these diseases go away. Diabetes, I mean, that just disappears. And so, I'm just mentioning, these are not diseases. These are exposures. And that's how I counsel my patients, that if this is an exposure relationship. People say, well, you're not really curing the diabetes, because if they start eating garbage again, they start getting diabetes again. It's like, right. if you start drinking water out of lead pipes, you're going to get lead poisoning again too. And so it's the same thing. Yeah, so it's an exposure relationship. You're being exposed to something, and you're getting sick because of it, and you get that thing away from you, and your body gets better, and that's great. You get that exposure again, you get sick again. And so people say, it's like, well, once I heal and everything's better, can I go back to eating all this other stuff? I'm like, yeah, you can, if you want to get sick again. Of course, it's perfectly up to you, but that's what's happening. It's an exposure. And so I'm writing a book that tries to argue that and make that argument, satisfying the Bradford Hill criteria for causation, for cause and effect, and really make a robust scientific argument that is accessible to the layman. You don't have to be a doctor to understand it, but it will hopefully be robust enough with enough, science-backed evidence and references to satisfy doctors and researchers and clinicians as well.
Man, you get a lot of important notes in there.
Mhm.
First off, like what you're talking about with, global wide, touching all continents as far as an observing indigenous populaces. Physical or nutrition and physical degeneration. The Weston A. Price book is like one of my favorites of all time, right? Because it's
Yeah.
black and white talking about I went to these continents, stayed, observed, monitored these people, took samples, of all their teeth and caries and and observed what the changes were, what their jaw structures were like, what their physical either good qualities were or their hindrances, and to be able to show direct correlation and arguably causation once or hence having adopted and changed their traditional diets. Like the numbers in that are amazing, from him saying like, yeah, out of 20,000 teeth that I examined, two out of 20,000 showed dental caries, right? Out of one, when eating their traditionally based diet, adhering to their forms of living, being removed from any Western influence or modern influence. And then immediately the following generation, having adopted the new forms of eating, exposure to media, whatever, or medium even, the number goes from 2 out of 20,000 to like 2,000 or 5,000 out of 20,000, like jumps significantly just from changes in the diet. Like their skulls change shape, their jaw bones change shape, their orbital bones change shape for lesser, or rather to their detriment. That has nothing to do with alcohol, or has nothing to do with risky environments or crazy athletic feats, like strictly based on what they were eating and how they were living their lives from one day to the next. So for you, amidst your research, was it, you mentioned the magical word causation. That's a hard thing to come with, right? Because everybody, for the most part, knows like, hey, it's all epidemiological, so you can't really show causation. It's only correlation. It can only be suspect. How are you going to present that, or how do you look to present, causation? Because I'm with you. Like I like you said, it's fucking exposure. Like it's not like, hey, if you drink this from this, you're gonna get lead poisoning. Okay, well, it's not. Maybe it's not the lead. It's like, if you don't drink that, you don't get lead poisoning. Like,
Yeah.
so how do you? I don't know if you can kind of allude to that, but how do you plan on showing that? Obviously, you got to have a lot of data to back that, but that's a bold move.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So Bradford Hills, like he sort of came up with some criteria that that you can sort of have whole satisfy several different criteria that could say, okay, this will make it basically be able to determine if there's a cause and effect relationship through epidemiological causation, right? Or epidemiological evidence to show sort of a cause and effect sort of relationship. And so it depends. So you have sort of the strength of the relationship, the strength of it, is it consistent across the board? Just like every time this happens, you see these two, they're always together. Specificity, it's just like you have a very specific sort of reaction. It's not just like, sort of, too broad temporality. So this is like, did cause precede effect, something. Yep. There are a lot of things that don't do that. Right. So like, so cholesterol and heart disease, for instance, or animal fat and heart disease. Heart disease, we were eating far more meat and animal fat in the 1800s than we were in the early 1900s, when heart disease started to go on the rise and became the number one killer in America. In fact, in the 1920s and 30s, when we were eating the least amount of meat in 200 years, and sort of a slope down in the 1800s, no heart disease recorded, or at least deaths from heart attack, until 1912 in America. Zero deaths before that. Oh, well, people weren't, I saw this guy, I swear to God, he said, well, people just weren't living long enough in the 1800s to get heart disease. And it's like, okay, I just spoke to a guy named Dr. Ankar Verma, who's an ER doctor over in India, and, largely vegetarian and vegan population. They eat, as a nation, 3 kilos of meat per year per person, right? So that's I mean, I go to like a Brazilian restaurant. I'm like, that's a day for me,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So, it's a very, very low meat supply.
Wow.
The chronic disease rate is exploding there. The heart disease rate has exploded there. They ate 5 kilos of meat 20 years ago per person per year, and the chronic disease rates were lower, right? And so now they're higher. They're eating even less meat. And he just treated a 17-year-old kid who had a heart attack. 17-year-old vegan kid who had a heart attack. So
Impossible.
we weren't living to be 17,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
You know, it's nonsense. And the thing is that you say, oh, everyone's dying in their 30s. No, that's average life expectancy from birth, which we touched on. But in the 1850s, that's true. In America, the average life expectancy from birth was 38. That doesn't mean that means people were dying at 38. That means half were above, half were below, right? That's what an average is, right? And apparently the doctor I heard talk about this, he's like some TikTok jackass. But he's like a white-haired old man. You know, he's been a doctor for a long time. You'd think he'd know what the word average means, but no, apparently not. And he's saying that no, you know, we were all dying, and you know, before we were able to get that age. But you know, again, half above, half below, and the statistics being kept since the 1850s in America were very clear. Like if you from 0, it was average 38, but if you made it to 10 years old, on average, you make it to 56, right? Because that gets rid of a lot of those childhood mortality, infant mortality, and you're very vulnerable as a kid. And so you get to 20, it's longer, 30, it's longer. So if you got to adulthood in the 1850s, on average, you would live nearly the same length that we would live now on average from those ages. And I mean, think of it this way. You know, I mean, that doesn't even pass the smell test, right? Because what's the minimum age to even run for president of the United States?
Yeah,
It's 35, right?
yeah.
And so, and that was a rule that came into play in the 1700s, right? And was certainly there through the 1800s. And it was just, oh no, everyone died in their 30s. Like, really? You couldn't even? I mean, what? Is this all these presidents just ancient old men at 32 and they just died in office? You know, 2 years on. Yeah, I mean, you know, John Adams died at 91. He was born in the mid 1700s. Jefferson died at 82. All the founding fathers, unless they were killed by something, died in their 80s and 90s. Ben Franklin was 64 when the Revolutionary War started. And so, I mean, plenty of time to develop heart disease. And yet, we did not have anyone dying from heart attacks until 1912. Well, people just were better doctors. No, they were absolutely brilliant anatomists. I mean, Gray's Anatomy was written hundreds of years ago, and it's perfectly detailed, beautifully sketched out, looking at, you know, the artery walls and all the different layers of the arteries and all these sorts of things. And you know, they could actually see, you know, different pieces of atherosclerosis, and they saw that as pathological, like that's abnormal. We don't normally see that, and so they wrote on it, they published on it, but they didn't see the heart attacks. There was a couple heart attacks throughout Europe, none in America. And they were very bizarre. A heart attack, someone dying from a heart attack or a myocardial infarction and a subsequent arrest, or other sequelae of death from myocardial infarction, is not a subtle sign. This is not something you'd miss on autopsy. You open that up, so you know you have a thrombus that knocks out that vessel, and that kills a whole patch of heart, and that heart is dead, and it is a different color. It looks different. It gets swollen and engorged, and it's a different color, and it becomes weaker. And sometimes it will form an aneurysm, sort of bulge out because it's weak now, and then it can rupture. And so you die because it ruptures, and you get a pericardial, hemopericardium, and it just sort of just crushes down the heart because it's just ruptured. That is not hard to miss. You have a whole big heart muscle just rips out, and there's just blood everywhere. Like, how are you going to miss that? No. Or you survive that, it doesn't rip out, and then it scars down, thins out, and then starts to bulge out, and that may rupture later on, or it may cause an electrical disturbance, which then you arrest, and then you see there's this big area of scar tissue there. So that's not a subtle sign either. So the first one they saw was in 1912, and then 10 years later, there's a lot more. And then 10 years after that, it's the number one killer in America. In fact, I think it became the number one killer in the 20s as well. So that's a massive jump up. And that's when we're eating the least amount of meat in literally 200 years. So there's no connection there. There's no temporality, right? We started eating more meat after that fact, right? So heart disease went up to be the number one killer, before we started eating more meat again. We were eating far more meat before that, no heart attacks. Then number one killer. And then after that, meat consumption started going up. So that doesn't satisfy those criteria, right? The temporality and, different things on like plausibility and coherence, experiment analogy, all these sorts of things. We're looking at, you have all these different criteria. You basically have to satisfy all these things. And so I'm making that argument, and I'm trying to, I absolutely, I think that you can make those arguments and show that there's a cause and effect relationship. Very simply, since 10,000 years ago, when we 8 to 10,000 years ago, when we started seeing the first societies have agriculture, there is a distinct difference in the pre-agricultural and post-agricultural fossil remains. They shrink by 4 or 5 inches. Their brains are smaller by 11% for men, 17% for women. Their jaws are smaller. Their teeth are crooked. They have a bunch of cavities. They have infectious disease and tuberculosis in their spines, signs of poor wound healing. Their femurs are shortened, which is a sign of malnutrition. They're stunted. And it's immediate. It's not hundreds of years or thousands of years. It's immediate. It's overnight. And when you go into agricultural populations, and so you have this immediate negative effect, and then you see Weston Price saw that in real time and was documenting it. The same thing. They had family members, the same genetics, and one was eating traditionally, one was eating more agrarian type of foods, and the complete disparities. And then generationally, track generations have changed, and then you could breed back. They started eating more animal-based foods, and they started, getting different changes generationally back the other way. We've seen this with cats. You feed cats the wrong thing. You feed them cooked meat instead of raw meat, and they change generationally. They get smaller, they get weaker, their brains are smaller, and their facial structures are different. And then you start giving them raw meat, and they start coming back. So we see this in human populations and animal populations. We saw this all throughout the fossil record. It wasn't just in Sumeria. It was in all the different areas that humans turned to agriculture at every time, in every location, with every population, with every crop that they went to. The same things occurred. The height and health of the population declined. And that's not my words. That's words of a professor of archaeology, paleoanthropology from Cambridge University. So that's not me saying that, right? And so this is something that we're seeing in real time now in the last century. So Weston A. Price documented this, but we saw this in the Native American populations, the Native Canadian populations, Native Alaskan populations, the Native Australian populations, and the Maasai. We're seeing that in real time now with the Maasai. There was a study with the Akikuyu and the Maasai by the British in the 1920s, published in 1931. It was a book. They put it in a book. It's massive. It was like 170 some pages, 176 pages or so. And they looked at the differences in nutrition, and because these were people that were alive at the same time in the same area and under the same conditions, and they were genetically similar because they'd been interbreeding for centuries, millennia, who knows, and so it's very, very good study because they had very different lifestyle diets, I should say. They had very different diets and eating habits, but everything else was very similar. And so the Maasai were very much animal-based, very much carnivores, and they had dairy, blood, meat, things like that. Even then in the 20s, they had started including some millet seeds, but not much. And before that, none. Right. And the Akikuyu were largely plant-based, especially the men would have like a lot of grains, and they didn't have a very diverse diet. The Akikuyu women had a more diverse diet, had more cruciferous, leafy greens and all that sort of stuff added in. And it was a stark contrast. It was that exact same disparity that we saw pre and post agriculture, right? We saw the Maasai men were on average 5 inches taller, 23 pounds heavier of lean body mass. There's not an ounce of fat on them. Yeah. 50% stronger. better formed teeth, developed cranium. And they were far healthier. They looked at medical records and went to different clinics, different hospitals, got the medical records. And then, because obviously these people live remotely, they don't necessarily have access to healthcare. They just went from village to village to village to village for years, documenting and doing their own medical assessments. And they found that the Maasai were far and away more healthy than the Akikuyu. The Akikuyu men were the least healthy. And the Nakikuyu women were better than them, but still very sick compared to the Maasai women, who were far healthier. And the Maasai men, who had more access to the blood and meat because they were the warrior cats. They had to fight lions with sticks to protect their herds and their families. And so they needed the better source nutrition, which was the blood and the meat. They were actually the healthiest of all. And so, so you have these clear distinctions. And now we're seeing more diseases in the Maasai as they've been incorporated into more and more, corn or seeds and crops and millet seeds and things like that. 1970s, you start seeing heart disease show up. There wasn't a single mention of heart disease or heart attack in the 1920s, 30s study. Nothing, right? And then in the 70s, you start seeing it. Well, they're having more grains then. Not even like processed food, it's grains. They're having more grains. And they start seeing this. In the 90s, I've known doctors who are older. They've done work in those areas in the 90s. They never saw heart disease. They never saw these problems. But if you look at the statistics, did say they show up okay, a little bit on the rise and things like that. But those are not the main things you were treating. Sure. Now they're becoming more significant. Diabetes is actually a big problem in the Maasai Mara now, and that's because Coca-Cola has trucks that go in to their villages every day, and they don't know. It's like those commercials from the 90s, like Coca-Cola truck comes in and all these little African kids are chasing after, Coca-Cola, it's so great. It's just like, what are you doing? You're poisoning these people, and they don't know that they should avoid sugar. And now they're getting much more sick. Dr. Mark Hyman from Cleveland Clinic, he was over in the Maasai Mara with the Maasai, and he saw this, and he was horrified that these Coca-Cola trucks were coming in. They would sell out within minutes. And there was in all the different villages, and he went to the chieftain of the area of the village he was staying at, and he said, "Hey, do you know that those sugary drinks, they're actually really bad for you? They can cause diabetes, they can cause tooth decay, they cause all these problems." And he was horrified. He said, like, "Oh, we have a really bad problem with diabetes. Do you think that's what it is?" And he's like, "Yeah, I really do." And so they don't even know. They're just being preyed upon. They're being taken advantage of. These people live out in huts in the middle of nowhere. It's just like what little money they have, they're spending on Coca-Cola. It's just like, it's nasty. It's just a nasty thing to do to people and exploit them like that. But you're seeing this temporality. Before they started eating this stuff, they did not have that disease. They started eating this crap. Now they have the disease, and it happens everywhere you look, every time, every place, regardless of the crop, regardless of what you do. And then what about reversibility? You have people stop eating them, it goes away. We see this in the literature with diabetes. If you put people on a high-fat, animal-based ketogenic diet, which is what all the ketogenic diets in the literature are, because if you get rid of carbohydrates, you have to replace it with fat and protein. Where does that fat and protein come from? It comes from animal source nutrition. You could do it with a plant-based one, but it's very difficult. You basically have to drink canola oil and take tons of supplements because it's a completely deficient diet way of eating. But that was the other thing with the Akikuyu. They were getting very, very sick. They're getting all these infectious diseases and all these other sorts of things. And they had a population that they could control their diet because they were in prison and things like that. And they did experiment or did testing, and they found they were very nutritionally deficient. So they said, okay, well, we'll supplement all these nutritional deficiencies. And they found that it didn't actually make them better. They didn't actually get better. They still got all the diseases. They still got all the infections. And it wasn't until they replaced the plants with meat that they actually started getting better. So again, there's that cause and effect, temporality sort of relationship there, and that reversibility, right? You're taking away the plants, you're putting in meat, and it gets better. And we see this in the literature with diabetes, because again, like the ketogenic diets, and there are thousands of randomized controlled trials in the literature looking at ketogenic diets and what a significant role they play treating specific diseases and medical outcomes, right? but they're all animal based because it's very difficult to do that with a plant based one. So they
Oh
don't.
yeah,
They replace the carbohydrates
and not with
with
whole food either.
yeah, exactly. You're eating your a whole. I mean, you could do ketogenic processed food diets, but
Yeah,
they largely don't. You are going more, and so there is an element of that. That there's going to be anytime you're sort of changing people's diets and more clean diet approach, you have to wonder are they going to make other sort of improvements in their life that help the user bias, and that certainly should be taken into account. But but either way, it's that's the diet that they're changing them into, and when you do change people into a high fat meat based ketogenic diet, diabetes goes away. It is reversible. So we've seen that in clinical trials now. We've seen that with autoimmunity, with Crohn's disease in particular. And that's a good example of a processed food, cleaner ketogenic diet, because you have something called an elemental diet, which is just, it's a can, shake sort of thing. It's very processed. It's just macros and micros. They're generally ketogenic because they were first developed for kids with epilepsy. And epilepsy, we've known for 100 years, we have data that ketogenic diets are a very, very beneficial treatment for people with epilepsy. And that was the treatment for epilepsy for decades until we started using pharmacology, and they just said, well, that's easier. It works the same, works as good, works as well. And so that's easier. And we just forgot that you could actually just change someone's diet and they just wouldn't have epilepsy anymore for most people, for many people anyway. And so you had these and some people still do. Johns Hopkins, last I read, it was a while ago, but they published to say, hey, look, this still works and we still use it. And they're one of the top neurological centers in the world. And so you use this elemental diet for people with Crohn's disease. It's just the macros and micros that you need, nothing else. Probably doesn't have all the micros you need because we don't necessarily know all the micros that we need, but it has as many as we know of. And that has been found in clinical trials in humans to be a better treatment for Crohn's disease than prednisone, which is a steroid, corticosteroid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's massive. It's so just not eating certain things is a better treatment for Crohn's disease than steroids, which is the gold standard. So what does that mean? That means there's something in that food that you have taken out that is causing the Crohn's disease flare up, right? So you remove it, it goes away, you bring it back, it comes back. That another one with Crohn's disease again, where they removed carbohydrates and fiber. And they found that you could keep people in remission without medication by removing carbohydrates and fiber for up to 51 months. So over 4 years, just by removing those two things. And contrasted that with the other group that didn't remove that. They stayed in remission on average 0 months without medication. So not a lot of months. And so that's showing that, again, that cause and effect relationship. There's something, either the carbohydrates and the fiber or something that comes along with the carbohydrates and fiber is causing the disease. And you take it away, it goes away, you bring it back, it comes back. And so that's sort of the arguments that I'm making. And because the thing is that until we recognize this as a medical establishment and certainly as people, it's very powerful for a patient to understand the cause and the origins of their illness, because they become very empowered and they say, hey, I can do this myself. I can take this into my own hands and I can educate my doctor. And I can say, hey, look, I'm getting better. Here's how I did it. And that doctor can go, holy crap, I haven't seen this before. I'm going to look into this more. Sometimes it's about 50-50. Some doctors are very good about that. They see something different. They want to know why. They want to know how that happened, because these things are not supposed to be reversible. They only get worse. And these people are coming off medication and they're getting better. Why is that? And so that's a very important question to ask. That's a very responsible question to ask. It's very irresponsible not to ask that question. If you're a doctor, you just dismiss and go, no. That has nothing to do with diet. Then you are really failing your patient population. You're failing in your duty of care as a clinician. And so you have to ask that question. Even if you conclude that, no, I don't think that, you at least have to ask the question. You at least have to look into it. And so it's a very powerful position for patients to be in when they get empowered. They don't need someone else to tell them what to do. They can just try it themselves and see. And so until we understand that as a medical community and as a society in general, that these diseases are not diseases per se, that these are toxic exposures, and we need to remove that exposure. And malnutrition, we need to get proper nutrition. Then we are going to be treating things the wrong way. If you think that if you have the wrong conclusion on what's causing a problem, you are going to get the wrong solutions on how to fix that problem. We're looking for cures to a disease, but these aren't diseases. This is an exposure. So how you treat an exposure is you remove the exposure. How do you treat lead poisoning? You get rid of the lead in your environment. That's the first and foremost thing you do. Then maybe you have medications that help you sort of chelate this stuff out and sort of weather the storm and get it out of your system. But the very first thing you do is you remove the lead. So with diabetes, that yes, you can be on metformin, you may need to be on insulin, you may need to be on other medications for a while your body is healing. But the first thing you do is you get rid of carbohydrates, seed oils, and processed foods, because that is what's causing the dysfunction. And and so that's what we need to do. We need to recognize as a society, and certainly as a medical establishment, that we are treating exposures, not diseases, or the actual diseases like infectious diseases. We are treating exposures, and so that's just a very different treatment modality. You have to do it in a very different way, and so that's why it's very important to me to get this book out there and hopefully have it. I don't care about book sales. I just want the information disseminated out there. And so people can understand that, because that will ultimately radically change the health of society. And unfortunately, we don't have, the pharmaceutical companies looking for cures right now. Goldman Sachs, they leaked a slide from one of their meetings that said, is it a viable business model to cure disease? And the argument there was, no, it's not. We want to treat the symptoms
damn straight
long term. We want them to keep having to, because a patient cured is a customer lost, right? And so they want to perpetuate these disease states, or at least not look for the cure, because there's no money in the cure. The money's in the treatment. And so if they can give you medications like diabetes, that you have diabetes now, you're on these medications the rest of your life, then they make a lot of money on that. And so that's a good return on investment. And that's fine. That's just their business model. That's where their heads are at. Fine. We just need to recognize that. We need to recognize that they aren't the cavalry coming to save us. They'll help us with part of it. They're like the weapons manufacturers. Like, sure, we'll keep giving you bullets. We'll keep selling you bullets. But we're not gonna win the war for you. You just keep doing that, and you keep paying us. Yeah, and they're working both sides. They're paying, they're loaning money and supplying weapons to both sides of the combatants. So aren't we nice? And it's just like, no, we want to stop the aggression. What's that? Sorry?
The good arms dealer wants to supply both sides. That's how you make money.
Yeah, that's it. And so we just need to recognize that and just say, like, okay, well, these people aren't going to help us stop the conflict. We need to figure out how to stop the conflict, and that's fine. Their business model is to make medications that can slow down symptoms and progression, and actually do help a lot of people. Absolutely do, but it's not going to be a cure. And we need to recognize that. And so we need, if we want a cure, if we want this to go away, then we need to look at other means. And that's my main purpose in writing this book, is to try to make that argument on how we should approach this to actually cure this and stop these diseases from taking place in the first place, or stop and reverse them in practice when people already have them. Because I see that in my practice every single day. I have a separate practice out from neurosurgery, because I have to, because I can't not do this for people, because I see these diseases just go away and no one else is doing that. And so how can I ethically not practice that type of medicine? How can I ethically, go around and not tell people about this? It's difficult to do that in a neurosurgical role. I don't have, an hour or so to sit with people and talk about these sorts of things. It's very quick. There's a lot of emergencies, a lot of, big problems. But in my other practice, I can sit down for half an hour and talk about these things and really, address root cause issues with people. And I see diseases simply go away. I guarantee you, I've cured more people of autoimmunity and diabetes than nearly any other doctor on this earth. Certainly any other doctor has been practicing, any endocrinologist that specializes in diabetes, I guarantee you I've reversed more cases of diabetes than they ever have. And, rheumatologists and other sorts of people dealing with, gastroenterologists and things like that with Crohn's disease. I guarantee you, I mean, except for like the few people that have figured this out as well, going back in history, there are gastroenterologists who knew this, that Dr. Salisbury, that knew this, but people alive now, I guarantee you I have, because no other mainstream gastroenterologist has ever cured Crohn's disease. No mainstream endocrinologist has ever cured diabetes. You only need one, and then you're at the top of the list. But people like Dr. Unwin in the UK, he's gotten 137 people with diabetes off medication and reversed their diabetes, right? And he keeps track of them because he was under a lot of fire, because he got a lot of heat for how he practiced medicine, doing diet and lifestyle interventions and reducing carbohydrates for his diabetic patients. But now he's shown and published that it is actually working, and it shut up a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so there are people out there, but how do you not do that? I mean, we're actually helping people in a way that traditional medicine can't help. And so, that's why I'm doing this. And I see this all the time. I see diseases just simply going away as long as you just change the way you're eating and to a more traditional approach. And so to me, it's very evident that this is the cause and effect relationship, and this is a toxic exposure. And so I'm just trying to write a book that hopefully makes that case very strongly, and helps move our society in a direction that can actually work on getting people well, as opposed to perpetuating disease, because it's not a healthcare system now, it's a sick care system. We're just sort of managing diseases as opposed to curing diseases and having people maintain health. Oh yeah. And so that's sort of become my mission in life. And that's part of it.
Freaking awesome, man. You are speaking to the namesake of this podcast for that exact reason. Why call it sick, scared, and stupid? Because it is proven, statistically proven, we as modern humans circa the last 100 years have become worse off health-wise. We are sicker. We are more afraid of walking around, what we say, what we do, our actions. We live in states of fear, and we are damn sure less intelligent. Fact. We've gotten unhealthier, and despite technological advances in science, medicine, engineering, and everything else, we've gotten worse off physically. We've gotten worse off mentally. Our mental health has obviously been catastrophic in the last, especially 25 years. And our intelligence, we have regressed as a society, as far as in what we've created, innovated. Sure, things have come around, and we've had lots of successes in technology and various forms of intelligence, but a lot of that has been on the forefront, or rather riding of the coattails of previous generations and industry. We are sicker, more scared, and more stupid than before. So hearing what you're talking about, I 100% agree, and not just to agree with you, because I'd love to combat with a guest, to be honest. It's fun. But that's the truth, man. And I think, honestly, a lot of it, when you touched on Grey's Anatomy, huge fan, also love the traditionalism of their being such pure anatomists. They were also great advocates for homeopathy more than anything. Those 18th and 19th century surgeons and doctors were healers. They were in search of healing, not in search of just patch it over with a pill. And like you said, talking about pharmacology, it wasn't about, just acid washing what was going on with pharmacology. It was like, let's figure out the homeopathic reasoning. And like you mentioned, that exposure word was everything. It's like, let's remove the cause of the exposure, and thus we remove the quote disease. But that's not the way it is now. Everything is reactive. Everything is, treat, as opposed to cure focused and cure forward. And I think a lot of it comes from people just forgetting about history, how short-sighted we are with history. You touched on, 25,000 years ago, agrarian cultures, and 15,000 years ago, megafauna animals, and 2,500 years ago, X, Y, and Z. And then agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, 18th, 19th centuries. That's not that long ago. It's not in the grand scheme of sapien and Neanderthal and every other evolution of ours as humans is not that long ago. But I think our short-sightedness is what holds us back the most, to where we see what we were raised on. You know, I'm on the cusp of 40. I know what I know in the 40 years that I have on Earth. Preceding that, it's only read or oral or traditional passed down history. But I think a lot of people now, it's very easy for them to forget about the past because of how just dominantly hyper stimulative the present is with news and information and the ready availability of anything, messages being good, truthful, or otherwise. I think that's the hurdle. That's the real hurdle. Because you are trying to argue with history as your main weapon. You know, it's your main asset. It's like it's factual, sure, but the enemy you face is the present. It's the media. It's the modern mind that says no, because I read it here and this told me there, and everywhere else I look, it's telling me to do it. It's like, yeah, but I got 2 million years on my back here, guys. I'm trying to show y'all, like, this is kind of what's going on.
Yeah.
How do you get through that, man? How do you get through that? And then to tell people like, hey, FYI, it's not the diet that's giving you all this healing. It's your fucking body doing it on its own. And it's the fact that you removed all this other shit. And I had that conversation with somebody before saying like, is the carnivore diet? I was like, I'm gonna tell you a newsflash. It's not the diet. The diet's a part of it. It's a big part of it. The diet is a vessel giving you and your body its best chance to do what it does naturally. You removing all the other stuff. Yeah, that's the get rid of the exposure for sure. But it's not like the diet is essentially the magic pill. You are the fucking magic pill. How do you, present that to people? And like I said, when you're up against this tidal wave of, difficulty, idiots, ignorance, stubbornness, youth, the future of the world.
Well, I mean, it's perfectly reasonable for people to question these sorts of things. When you question the dogma, when you question the known truths of the day, you should be questioned, and people should be like, hold on a second, where do you go? You shouldn't just believe anybody who comes up with anything, anytime, right? I mean, you should critically question any new idea. First of all, it's not a new idea. This has actually been our very well understood phenomenon, and for millennia, that meat was the meal. That was what the rich could afford. They were much more healthy and much taller and better teeth. They lived longer. They had better health throughout their life. There was actually a study out of University of Adelaide in South Australia. They looked at 175 different countries around the world. All 175, when corrected for different confounding factors and socioeconomic status, etc., every single country was associated with higher meat consumption, was associated with longer life and better health every single time, every single country, everywhere. And, so people can say what they want, and they will make excuses about, well, why that's not, well, fine. But, all the epidemiological studies on saying that plants are so good are pretty nonsensical as well. Oh, but the blue zones. Well, the blue zones actually ate a hell of a lot more meat than they were reported to, a lot more meat than they reported to. In fact, some of them were nearly carnivorous, such as in Sardinia. And they were also, practicing pension fraud. They were lying about their age so they could qualify for pensions earlier because they were very poor, or their elderly relatives who had died. They just didn't report that. And so they were just kept collecting a check for 20 years and said like, wow, this lady is, 108, I was like, oh yeah, no, yeah, she's doing well. You can't see her though. She's busy, and,
it's like the voter fraud scene in Black Sheep.
So it's just, there was that on it too. But what about all the blue zones that weren't reported there? Because Dan Buettner, the guy who did the blue zones, he's a Seventh-day Adventist church member, and he worked for the Seventh-day Adventist church, who were religiously anti-meat, and the church bought the blue zones from him for $68 million, right? So they're just pushing this narrative because that's their religious ideology. It's not because it's the truth. And then what about all the blue zones that they ignored, like the Mormon population in America, who actually lived longer than the Seventh-day Adventists, who were one of the blue zones in Loma Linda, California. And the Mormons actually live longer than the Seventh-day Adventists. They have no dietary restrictions. Loma Linda, they're all vegetarians. First of all, no, they're not. They have a higher rate of vegetarianism than the rest of America. But most of them just eat just normal stuff. But they generally don't smoke, don't drink, don't do drugs, don't drink coffee, don't do all these other sorts of vices. And they have a strong sense of community and family and all that sort of stuff. All these things help. And so do the Mormons. Yeah. And they don't have any dietary restrictions. They live longer than the Seventh-day Adventists. So, standard American diet apparently is better than more vegetarian diet, if you want to look at it that way. And then Hong Kong, that eats more meat per capita than any other population, also have the highest life expectancy from birth than any other population. And so why aren't they blue zones, right? They're not putting their own. What about the anti-blue zones? What about India, that is largely vegetarian, eats only 3 kilos of meat per year, and they have 17-year-olds dying of heart attacks? 1 in 4 people in India will die of a heart attack. 1 in 3 men will die of a heart attack. You know what I learned when I was talking to Dr. Verma? He said that their diabetes rates, their diagnosed, not estimated diabetes, diagnosed diabetes rates in India, with a population of 1.2 billion people, was 30%. 30. So you're talking, what, 400 million people diagnosed with diabetes. In America, it's only 9%. It's 9% of 320 million people, right?
Yeah.
Way less. So they have way, way, way more diabetes, and that's just diagnosed. Yeah. So many people in India are living very rurally. They don't have access to medicine. They who knows how much larger that number is. 30%. They have over 3 times the diabetes rate of this fat, slovenly, processed food, meat-based diet in America. And, smoking, drinking, all that sort of garbage. Americans are supposed to be, just the joke of the world from a health perspective, and obesity rate. And yet this wonderful, idyllic, plant-based nation of India. Everyone says, like, well, if plants are so bad for you and meat's so good for you, explain India. I'm like, what? India explains it. They are largely plant-based, and they're some of the sickest people on earth. So if plants are so good and meat is so bad, explain India. Explain why 17-year-old kids who are vegan are getting heart attacks.
That's crazy.
And why 400 million people have been diagnosed with diabetes.
That's
that's absolutely out of control. So, it's so how do I combat this? People saying, well, but we've always thought this, that, and the other. Okay, right. But as Richard Feynman said, you want the clearest thinking, people around. And he said, it doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And that's the thing. We run this experiment and it's wrong. We said meat's bad, fat's bad, reduce it, reduce red meat, reduce fat, reduce cholesterol. We did that. Fruits and vegetables are good for you. Grains are good for you. We did that. These unsaturated vegetable oils, they're good for you. Yet we did that. And we become the fattest and sickest that human beings have ever been in human history and prehistory. And all around the world, you see these anti-blue zones where people are largely plant-based, and they're the sickest populations alive on earth today. And so it does not hold. It does not even satisfy the known phenomena as an explanation. So you just look at the world around you, and it doesn't hold. So there's a disconnect there. Something you were talking about before, which was, understanding that, these things that are making us sick, that goes back to Hippocrates, right? Yeah. Hippocrates, well, first of all, how much of this was from him himself, or is this somewhere around his time there's a tribute to him? Doesn't matter. It's attributed to him. Was, the classic line, let food be thy medicine and medicine thy food. I mean, they knew what the hell was going on back then. In fact, in ancient Egypt, there was an ancient Egyptian proverb that said, half of what you eat feeds you, and the other half feeds your doctor, right? Because this stuff you're eating is making you sick and making you go to the doctor, and you have to pay him to get you better because of what you're eating, right? And then another thing Hippocrates says, which I really liked, was before you try to heal someone, first ask them if they're willing to give up that which is making them sick. Oh, yeah. And that's exactly what it is. And that's what I ask my patients. I say, listen, this is what's making you sick. If you remove this, this will go away. Are you willing to do that? And they're like, and most of the time it's a yes, when I
Yeah.
explain everything to them and it makes sense to them. Every now and then they'll sort of, I just don't think I can do it and all that sort of stuff. Fine. That's
Yeah.
fine. But understand that this is the cause. And we do some other things and adjust their diet and other sorts of, treatments and things like that. And, but I just had a lady come back to me who said like, oh, it's a bit too restrictive. I just want to go to a bit less restrictive sort of way of eating. So, okay. So we opened it up a bit. She came back to me after a few weeks and went, yeah, I had to go back to carnivore. I just felt so much better on that. And I was on that for like 2 weeks. And then I started eating this other stuff. And I just felt like crap. And so, I had to go back. And so I'm feeling much better now. And it's like, that's good. Now you have that contrast, just what this is doing to you. And now you're much better able to, to continue on with the treatment. But, that's how you deal with it. And the thing is just, it's just like, I mean, you play sports, how people talk trash on the other team. And at the end of the day, people can talk trash. And at the end of the game, they're like, you guys suck. And you just go, scoreboard. That's it. Scoreboard. And so that's the thing. It's like, people say that to me and they're like, oh, you're killing people. You're horrible. You're this. And not many, actually. It's actually pretty rare, but you get the odd troll. But, all I have to do is point to the scoreboard because I'm reversing people's diseases. You look at I'm sure, on your videos as well, on your posts as well, that there's just thousands of people commenting on how massively their health improved and how they come out all these medications. And I mean, people are coming out of wheelchairs with MS, and on MRI, their nerves are healing. Their lesions are healing just by dietary changes, right? That's not supposed to happen. And they're coming off medication and they're getting better. I had one lady on my podcast and she said that her neurologist, rheumatologist, whoever was treating for her MS, was basically saying like, if you stop taking this medication, like you're going to be in a wheelchair. Like this is extremely irresponsible. You're being reckless. And so she stopped going to him. She's been in complete remission for over 2 years. And he said himself is like, yeah, on your MRI, yeah, your lesions are healing. And she's like, all right, well, I haven't been taking medication, and it's like, oh, that's reckless. And it's just like, well, maybe it's the diet. No, definitely not. It's just like, really? You can't even entertain that thought. It's you've never seen this before. No medication's ever done this. And now she's not on any medication and so on. So just scoreboard, like what's happening to real people in real life. And that's the only thing. And so, it's water off a duck's back at this point. It's, even if people were to challenge me and try to take my license away, I mean, I'd obviously fight it tooth and nail. But I can just show them like, look, I am actually curing disease. You're not.
Yeah.
I'm the only one that's actually doing something good here. And even if I lose it, I can still disseminate information. I can still get this information out. The vast majority of people that I've helped is because of, videos like this, and people have come and seen them and said, okay, I'm going to give it a try. My patients, I have hundreds of patients, that I have on a carnivore diet. I check their bloods, I check their blood work, I check up on them, and we're seeing this, very much by the book, and I'm helping them all along the way, and they are getting better. But that is the vast minority of people that have been benefited. So, even if I, were to get, drummed out and wasn't able to see patients individually, which would really upset me, obviously, I would still be able to get out there and help people. And that the proof of the pudding's in the eating. You do it and you see the result and it works. And so that's the thing. You eat meat for a month. You don't eat anything else. It's not going to kill you. Even if this were to cause heart disease, it's not going to do it in a month, And so you just do that, and you have Crohn's disease, you have diabetes, and all of a sudden you're saying, wow, that got a lot better. And so you just do it, and so again, it doesn't matter what anyone says. What matters is the experiment. What matters is that N of 1. What happens when you do something, that's the only thing that matters. Well, this study says if you do this, then this will happen. It doesn't matter what that study says if it doesn't happen for you, right? because it's not applicable to you either in your patient population or it's just a crap study. Most studies are crap studies. Reality is what you need to listen to. And so that's what I do. I deal in reality. I don't deal in academia. I don't deal in fraudulent studies that are paid for by the big food and pharmaceutical companies. I deal with reality and real patients in real life situations. And I say, look, this should happen. I tell them, if you do this, here are your bloods. This is why they're off. This is what's happening with your hormones. This is what's happening with your insulin. This is what's happening with your blood sugar. This is what's happening with your thyroid. And this is why it's happening. And you change what you're doing, you will see these exact changes. And you tell them that, and they start doing it, and they start feeling better. And then 2-3 months later, I check their bloods again, and the exact things that I said were going to happen. And they just go, yep, that's what we're doing, So I deal in reality, and these people are dealing in theory. And well, theoretically, this paper said, don't give a shit. I care what happens in real life to real people. And so that's how I approach it. And the thing is that when you come at this in a very straightforward, logical sort of approach, and you say, well, look, these are the results, and this is why it works, and this is the science behind it. People get it, and patients get it, but doctors get it. PhDs, I get professors of medicine, professors of biochemistry, professors of biology. I get dentists. I get all sorts of different medical practitioners and scientists and researchers contacting me saying that this all makes sense. And botanists saying like, I study botany. I teach botany. Like everything you say about this is completely correct about plants being toxic. So I don't care about the naysayers because I have so many other people that are very esteemed experts in their field confirming my views on these things. And then now patients in the millions that are doing this and improving, and the number that don't improve or have something wrong or whatever that I've seen, I mean, I could count on the fingers of one head. It's like whenever, and people have problems and they can say, oh, it didn't quite work for me and this and the other. And there can be reasons for that. Or somebody has a problem. People, oh, my hair's falling out. Oh my God. And they freak out. And that would freak people out. Yeah. But they don't understand that when you go into a ketogenic diet, that metabolism change can trigger a fallout phase, but then it comes back and it grows back and it can actually grow back thicker. And so that's what a lot of people are experiencing, but it can freak them out. And so, they may stop for that reason, or maybe they're not losing weight as fast. And so, it didn't work for me. When you work with people one-on-one and you talk to them about what's going on, and, sometimes people actually have, severe deficiency. It could be extremely hypothyroid. That could be why they're losing their hair. It's not being caused by the change in the diet. It's something that's underlying. And so there's some other process going on. And you can address these sorts of things. But every single patient that I've ever worked with, I've never not been able to figure out what was going wrong, And so, people, I'm sure, have decided to stop. Plenty of people have decided to stop for plenty of reasons. But everyone that I've worked with, we've always been able to work through and find a solution to make it work for them. Every single one. And some people it's just purely preference. They just want to eat a more diverse diet. It's not because of a health reason. And so, when you're just seeing this, people by the hundreds of thousands, by the millions, you just don't care what people say after that, because that you're helping people and that people are really benefiting from this. And that's really the only thing that matters.
That's awesome. Yeah, man. I've yet to, I don't care if it's something related to an appendage growing back or something that's faulty or nerve deadening or something. I had a guy actually talking about, he's had tons of wrist damage from an injury. He's had like 12 different surgeries in the wrist, and he's about to have his wrist fused permanently. Dude, I don't know what to do. Do you think a carnivore diet would help me? I was like, I sure as fuck would try it.
It's not going to hurt.
It's not going to hurt. And you got 2 months till July and you're going to be locked in there for good. He's like, so what would you do? I was like, I would red meat, salt and water, and get some organs in me. And I would not do anything else. He's like, well, I've been struggling with binge eating. I was like, well, look at your wrist every time you think about that and think like, this is going to be stuck, frozen for the rest of my life. Or I can try. And I said, yeah, man, 0.0001 as a denominator can still maintain a fraction. But 0.0, absolute zero, can never be a denominator. I will happily take that 0.0001 chance of my wrist not being fucked than the absolute zero. And he's like, well, I mean, I guess I'll give it a try. And the same thing to anyone else that says, can carnivore diet work for this? Can it work for this? Can it work for that? And let's say it's something outside my wheelhouse. Honestly, I don't know, but I've yet to see something to where it does not either benefit greatly or absolutely just cure out completely. I haven't seen it fail yet, in a good way. And like you said, whether it's somebody said, well, my hair fell, I was like, well, how long did you do the diet for? Well, 2 weeks. Okay. Or somebody says, this happened to me. Well, what else were you doing? Well, I was still kind of drinking alcohol and having a little cocaine on the side. I'm like, well, it's not really doing it. So there's always more questions to go into. But like I said, I've yet to see one where it hasn't really, really helped any issue, any ailment, any disease, anything, or gotten rid of it completely. You mentioned the scoreboard. I got to give a shout out to a friend of ours, Ryan Talbot from Michigan State track and field, the decathlete, just won another Big Ten decathlon meet, coming in first place as a strict carnivore. Big
awesome.
shout out to Ryan, dude. He's fucking beast, man. Listen to this.
Killing it.
So decathlon for everybody, 10 events, the last of which is the 1500 meter. Dude ran a 4:46, 1500. So sub 5 minute 1500 as the 10th event, as the last event. Again, as a strict carnivore, like, what a stud, man. Like everything, the long jump shot, put all the things are 47.94, 400, a 14.75, 110 meter hurdle. Like, that's pretty boss and good enough for first place anyway. So big shout out to Ryan. I know you're busy, Doc, and you got a lot going on. Obviously, like you said, serving hundreds of patients that you get to see, the privilege and how fortunate you are to be able to do that, infect and influence so many people. I'll ask you one more question. I think the problem that we face, that you face, that anyone in this space is up against is that the great diet debate, the best diet debate, the optimal diet debate will never end so long as it pits emotions against utility. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, you need to work in reality, right? And so if you're saying this, like, well, it makes me feel better about a certain situation to eat a certain way, then that's fine. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be healthy doing that. And it doesn't mean that that's sustainable. Well, it doesn't matter because no, it does matter. It really does matter. And you're causing a lot of human suffering. And, you can be really upset that you have to eat an animal in order to gain maximal nutrition and optimal nutrition. But that is the reality. And not doing that and avoiding that doesn't actually make as big of a difference in the world as you think. But what it is doing is causing a huge burden of disease around the world, where 17-year-olds are getting heart attacks, where 400 million people in India have diabetes and are being sickened and dying decades early after decades of disease and suffering. That's the level of suffering that's pretty unheard of around the world. And so, we don't want animals to suffer. I don't think you should ever treat animals wrong, inappropriately. You have a duty and responsibility to care for them and give them a good life and a very clean, quick death, if that's what we're doing, right? It's a lot better than going out and hunting these things and you're shooting. Well, you can get a pretty instant kill, but sometimes they're lingering and it takes a while for them to go. When you slaughter an animal in captivity, it's close to instant as it can get.
Yeah.
And it's as humane as possible. And your people's emotions can drive them down the wrong path. You can't go on emotions. You have to have a heart, but you can't just be driven by emotions, because if you are, then how many just absolute disasters have been driven through emotions? Hitler and the communists in the rise in the 20th century that were responsible for the enslavement of billions of people and the murder of hundreds of millions of people. Those were all emotionally based arguments. This is a better way. We're going to make a utopia. It's going to be wonderful. Those are all emotional arguments, and it drove us down into hell, into the pits of hell. And that's sort of what's going on here too. So, like you said before, it's like I haven't really seen many things that this didn't help. If it doesn't, there are things that exist that can go wrong with the body that don't come from food. But you know what? there are all the thousands of other things that are going to improve with your health and sleep and hormones and all these other sorts of things are going to be helped in so many ways that even if it is something, it's not going to regrow cartilage as far as I know. But
Yeah.
you know what it'll do? It'll help with the pain. It will completely reduce the pain that you have and the expression of that pain and that damage. And it will help you in other ways. It will reverse your diabetes and your other sorts of things. It will help you lose weight and all these other things that will all combine to making it a lot easier to live with that injury or that problem that maybe won't get completely fixed, but it'll help. I have patients with arthritis, very bad arthritis. One patient told me the other day they've been on carnivore and they had some chimichurri sauce with their steak and they had bad arthritis in their hands. And they said their hands were excruciatingly painful for several days after that. And it was just like just having that sauce that just made her pain so uncontrollable. And then she realized, I haven't had been in pain in my hands in years, right? And so normally she had extremely bad joint pain in her hands because they had very bad arthritis. And so, you have to deal with reality, and you can go down all the arguments, about why, say if we're doing like an emotional appeal, such as, it's not nice to eat animals. Okay. It's not nice to eat animals, but you know what? It is reality, and animals eat animals, and we are animals. And, you can't just take out all the carnivores. You don't kill all the whales, all the birds, all the lions, all the, foxes and things like that, all the fish, because that's just part of nature. And that's what they say. It was like, well, that's just part of nature. Yeah, we're part of nature too.
Yeah.
And we need to remember that.
Plants are carnivores.
Yeah, which is that too, and also, they're intelligent. I mean, there's more and more studies and data coming out on plants about how intelligent they are. They actually have a nervous system, and people don't realize that, that they have a nervous system, and they don't have a central nervous system. They are a central nervous system. They are an entire nervous system. They can respond and react to pain and issues that are plaguing them, and they can see. Apparently, that was freaky to me. I just learned that the other day, that they can actually see. And then you get close enough to them, they can see you, and they can tell the color of your shirt that you're wearing. I don't know how they figured that one out, but they did. And so they don't have eyes, but they have photoreceptors all over their bodies that, like the same thing, proteins that we would have in the back of our retina. So they don't have eyes. They are eyes. They don't have a brain. They are a brain, right? They communicate. They speak. They speak in vibrations. They tell each other when they're dry and when they need help, when they need this, when they need that, when they're being attacked by something specific. Something else will send a different signal. So they communicate through vibration, through chemical, shooting out chemicals in the air, and also through their root structures. They have different. This is weird, complex system with the fungus in the soil. They can communicate through that fungus in the soil between root systems, even in different species, because different species of tree and plant can communicate through different fungal systems. And as long as you can communicate through that system, you're on the system, you're on the network. And there's generally like a sentinel tree in a forest that actually controls the whole forest. It's like the leader, the ruler of the forest, and actually says, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get these resources over here. These guys need a bit more mineral phosphorus. We're going to get some phosphorus over there. These guys need more water. We're going to bring water over here. It actually controls all the, so it's like an entire economy that they're controlling and helping each other out, so that the whole system, that the whole society, if you will, of the forest survives, right? And because, if they all survive, or if more of them survive, it's more channels, that herd sort of survival principles. That the more of them survive, the more of them that are likely to survive. And so we're destroying these things, and to grow other plants and to kill them too, and to kill all the animals that are trying to eat these plants and all these sorts of things. You actually cause way more death and destruction from animal life, from sentient animal life. You destroy quadrillions of insects every year by trying to grow crops. And so, you can go down all that and show that why your emotion is like, well, it's not nice to kill an animal. Great. Then you should eat the animals, because growing crops kills way more animals as a result. You could go down that thing, but not everybody's ready to hear that message or will accept it. And, but it doesn't, you don't need to get there, like this is causing human suffering. and you can make that decision for yourself. You don't get to, force that on other people, because, people's children are getting affected. People are having miscarriages. They're having birth defects. They're having higher autism rates. People in their 70s alive right now, 1 in 10,000 rate of autism. Hmm. In the younger generations, and the generations coming up, it's in America, it's 1 in 34 and 1 in 22 men. So saying, well, we just didn't diagnose it well enough back then. And so that's why the autism rates are coming up. Bullshit. We have older people. They were alive back then when we were bad at diagnosing things. They're alive right now. We could diagnose them right now, but they don't get that diagnosis. People in their 70s right now don't have autism, have never had autism at the rates that we're seeing now. So you're destroying a child's entire life and future because of your ideology, because of your emotions. So your emotions is to try to be nice and good, but what you're doing is pure evil. And that's what the people that supported Hitler and Stalin and Mao, they thought this is going to be good, this is going to help people, this is going to be great, and they destroyed humanity. They put people into slavery and death. And that's where your emotions get you. You have to use your brain. And, we're not doing that at the moment. There's something that Thucydides said, is the ancient Greek general during the Peloponnesian War, and he was the historian, one of the early historians. And what he said, and it's tangential, but it's sort of similar. He said that if you separate your warriors from your scholars, you'll have your fighting done by idiots and your thinking done by cowards. Like, you have to have both. Right. And so right now, we're sort of separating out our emotions from our intelligence and our thought and our rational thought. Like, you can't do that. You can't just go blindly on emotion. You can't go blindly on intellect either. They tried this in the Vietnam War. They had the brain trust, and everyone now that's pejorative. Like, well, listen to this brain trust. They had all these guys, with a lot of letters after the name from Harvard and elsewhere. That's like, oh, we're gonna do this war really great. It's like so many more people died as a result of that. They should have just let people come in with overwhelming force, just set the stage and be like, this is going to be like this all day, and just have the other side just go, yeah, no, this isn't happening. Instead, they decide, oh, we're gonna just, whatever they do, we'll just match it. It's like, why the hell would you do that? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Alexander the Great's not going to do that. They're just going to go in there and just bang, just hit at the heart and take it out. And you had, General Mattis, when he was let loose with ISIS, he took over an area the size of Illinois in like weeks. Yeah. Right. That's how that can work. If you have your fighting done by scholars, which Mattis is. I mean, the guy knows what he's doing, but you can't separate these things out. So you can't just be like, oh, well, we're just going to think about it. No, you have to have a heart. You can't just be like, well, we're eating animals, we're going to eat animals. No, you have to do it right. You don't damage the animals, don't harm them. That's better for the animals. It's better for us. It's better for the environment. It actually is. The factory farming where you have no animal welfare to speak of. It is a worse product. We get worse nutrition. It's worse for the environment. It's worse for the animal. So it can't just be one or the other. You have to have both. And, that's what Thucydides was saying as well. And I think it's the same thing. You can't just go off the fact. You have to go off both. You have to use your brain and your heart to come up with the best solution for us, animals, and the planet. And that's hopefully what I'm doing.
Amen. Man, what a good time. Congrats on your actual book. Yeah. We're looking forward to that. Man, Anthony Chaffee, MD, on Instagram, Anthony Chaffee, MD, on YouTube, the host of the Plant Free MD podcast and other channels, Anthony Chaffee, MD. Man, I mean, you're at the forefront, you're on the front lines. You see it more than I think, arguably anybody, like you said in your own words, have cured more people of certain issues and ailments and autoimmune diseases. And even if they're not, like you said, diseases, but exposures than anybody else on the fucking planet. That's pretty cool, man. That's pretty damn awesome. You excited to come to the States in a few weeks then?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always nice to come back to the States. That's that's no matter where I go in the world, it's always my home. And I've my roots are there. and my heart's there. I absolutely love America. The more I travel around the world, the more I appreciate America and want to, maintain what it is to be America and try to get back to really what the standard principles of America was or were, and I think we've lost that. And, we're going down the same old rabbit hole of just, well, communism is great. Wouldn't that be great if we just tore down America and went back to gulags and slavery? It's an old system. It's not new. Communism is not new. It's just putting totalitarianism under a different name. The people run it. No, the government runs it, and someone runs the government. And so you automatically have a totalitarian slave state where the government owns everything. The oligarchs own everything. It's just putting in a new aristocracy. It's replacing an old aristocracy with a new aristocracy. Well, we don't have an aristocracy now. We have people running their own lives. And so now you're going to take away that freedom to put in place a new aristocracy. It's not what you want. And so it's hard to see that. It's hard to see people making that argument that we should do that. And so I don't know. It's one of those things that I feel that maybe I should come back and maybe try to do something about it, because that's you have to have. I mean, you have to fight for things if you want to keep them. That's the saying is it's the only thing that evil needs to be victorious is for good men to do nothing, good people to do nothing. And so if you just sit there and just go, well, I'm sure it'll swing back the other way. They'll go too far. Sometimes it goes so far it sticks. That's how we got the USSR. That's how we got communist Russia. That's how we got Cuba. That's how we got Venezuela. That's how we got North Korea. If you don't put up a fight, it doesn't swing back unless there's a fight. And we go, they'll go too far and it'll just swing back. No, we have to swing it back. That's the only way it swings back, right? We have to say, absolutely not. That's enough of that bullshit. You go back to your room. You go to your room. You're in timeout now, and we're going to get back to being, free people. People can actually run their own damn lives and not be subject to totalitarian whims from these emotional people that just want they're thinking with their emotions as opposed to their heads. So but yes, I always look forward to coming back to the States.
Awesome, man. Well, we look forward to welcoming you in the great state of Texas very soon. It's gonna be a good time. And yeah, again, for everybody else, I'll have Dr. Chaffee's notes and social channels and everywhere else you can find him. Follow him, tune into his podcast there below. But otherwise, thanks so much again. It's a pleasure seeing you, Dr. Chaffee. And for everybody else, I'm Jake Thomas. This has been another episode of Sick, Scared, and Stupid. Hopefully you won't be any of those things after tuning into this and taking some of this man's message about emotions versus reality. See you next time.